there's health functions and health modulating properties of these different vitamins and minerals that we really have only scratched the surface about. And so whenever people say, oh, plant-based diets are like perfectly healthy for everybody, they're saying that on the basis of no evidence.
In your estimation, what are the top nutrition, wellness, health myths that you see circulating? And yeah, let's just debunk them.
Well, there's so many. So we'll do a few, and but it's like hard to cover everything. I guess part of it is the reason like everybody eats, and so everybody has like an emotional connection to their foods, so that they end up like. So there's myths about literally everything that people eat.
Everything.
Literally, right? Literally, there are literally people who think you can live without food. Food is a conspiracy. You know, breatharians.
What are the breatharians? Yeah.
Breatharians, breatharians. I don't know how to pronounce it. I just know there's a Wikipedia article about these guys, and they think that it's sort of a conspiracy that everybody's been conditioned into believing that you have to eat foods in order to survive, but you don't, and that's not actually how people live. They actually can live off the air. So.
Insane. I mean, I guess there are also people that believe the world is flat, and
Yeah, literally everything.
Wild.
Everything you can imagine.
Well, okay, let's start at the top. I think one of the more pervasive myths that I see, or maybe it's not a myth, but one of the more pervasive maxims that I see circulating is that you've got to restrict carbs and eat a high-fat diet to lose fat. That carbohydrate deprivation is the key to fat loss, and that it's superior to other diets. What's your take on that?
There's like so many different ways of approaching this, but like the first way I would approach this is I would say, look up pictures. Maybe this is a mean way of approaching it, but like this is a no BS way. Look up pictures, like go find pictures of people at low carb conferences, and then go compare them to pictures of people at like high carb, low fat, like vegan conferences. And what you'll see often is the people at low carb conferences are not necessarily ideal body weight. And then the people at like the high carb vegan conferences are often like kind of, if anything, almost underweight. Like they look like often like rail thin. And that's just anecdote. That's not the first most important piece of evidence. But like, if you just think about your common sense experience and you think about people who like eat like high carb vegan diets, usually if anything, they're almost emaciated sometimes. And then on the other hand, you know, not everybody who eats a low carb diet necessarily loses weight. But if we start digging down deep into this question, the idea that you have to restrict carbohydrates in order to lose weight is based on this idea called the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. It's basically insulin is what drives the increase in fat cell size. So whenever you get high insulin levels, fat cells take up free fatty acids. They turn them into triglycerides and adipocytes, or at least maybe the liver does. I don't know. In either case, fat cells take up triglycerides and or free fatty acids from the blood. That's how they do it, is through high levels of insulin. And so if you don't have high levels of insulin, then your body can't take up fat from the blood, and your fat cells can't get bigger. The problem with this is just not how fat cells work, and this is not how obesity works. So first of all, when you look at the genetics of obesity, most of the genetics of obesity are not related to fat cell size or insulin, or there's maybe a couple genes, but like the vast majority, I think something like 90% of genes related to obesity have to do with the brain. Essentially, probably with food reward and people who just are genetically programmed to want to eat more for brain related reasons. And sometimes the light goes off in this room, so now I look like I'm in an interrogation room. But sorry, what?
It just makes you look more dramatic, like a
all the better,
supervillain, right? Or something. But that's okay. All the better. Yeah.
Model.
Okay, so you're saying that genes that may predispose one to obesity are not necessarily having an effect on, like, for example, metabolism. It's not that they have a slower metabolic rate. It's just that they may be more inclined to overeat.
Yes. And like in the 1990s, it was thought that people who were obese had a lower metabolic rate, but it's now thought, based on better methods that have been created since that time, that finding wasn't true. So it's not, at the time it wasn't misinformation, but it's become misinformation because the science has been updated. People with obesity actually probably tend to have a little bit higher metabolic rate because they're burning more calories. But yeah, it's mostly a food intake issue, which is causing obesity, rather than a calorie output or a calorie expenditure aspect. Of course, there's individual differences, but overall, obesity is overall caused by elevated calorie intake rather than depressed calorie output. So yeah, so it's brain related with respect to wanting to eat more, essentially, and that's sort of an automatic drive that people have. We think that we can put it under our willpower, and to some extent we can, right? You can white knuckle it, you can count calories. Bodybuilders do it all the time, but for most people who are not like absolutely obsessed with doing this, that's not generally going to be a way that you're going to lose weight. You're generally going to follow your natural eating drive. And so people with differences in their brains, some people have more of a drive than others. And then, of course, one of the natural caveats to this is that it probably also depends on food environment, right? So in a more ultra-processed food environment, the food environment that we have right now, those people with those genetic differences will be more inclined to getting obesity in such an environment. But if we had a food environment that wasn't full of ultra-processed foods, there might not be as much of a problem with these brain circuits, because these brain circuits generally go after things like hyper-palatable, ultra-processed foods. And if those foods don't exist, that super high-level food reward, then the obesity phenotype, so to speak, will not be as expressed so in traditional environments. So it's an interaction between genes and the environment, and people with those particular genes in this environment are the ones who tend to get obesity, and people without those genes, they're more protected.
Do you think back in the day that provided like a survival advantage?
There is such like a big. I would have said yes, like a few years ago, but like apparently there's a really extensive debates. If you ever have a chance to talk with John Speakman, he's a genius in this area. He's like one of the best obesity, metabolism, maybe even like the best biologists like in the world. He's like a member of the National Academy of Sciences and even the Chinese Academy of Science. I think he's a member of like every Academy of Sciences. He's like 3 different ones, which is like short of a Nobel Prize. But yeah, no, he has papers on this where he goes into extraordinary detail about this. I think his theory is that I want to say it has to do with predation. I think the dominant theory, according to him, and he may need to correct me on this, but I think, or this is one theory, and I think this is his theory, is that when humans were no longer subjected to predation threat, then the genes that kind of kept our weights under control, kept us from eating too much and becoming obese, selection stopped acting on them. So there are certain people in the population and a certain amount of genes that stopped needing to necessarily keep us lean. And yeah, there might be some positive benefit for obesity genes in some ancestral environments. So some people want to eat more. And so because of those two different things, not necessarily needing to worry about predation, plus maybe some other advantage or just maybe genetic drift, humans have tended to have maybe more obesity genes. That's one important theory that I think John ascribes to. But yeah, it's funny. Yeah, but back to the carbohydrate insulin model. So obesity is not governed by insulin. Yeah, sure. If you have like a diabetic who loses the ability to secrete insulin, that's what type 1 diabetes is, at least. They need insulin or else they'll waste away because they can't engage in anabolic processes. They can't grow their fat cells. But that doesn't mean just because you have a pathological process that causes people to be unable to maintain weight doesn't mean that process is necessarily the thing that drives obesity. Other processes are what drive obesity. That's just something that you need in order to not waste away. So just because you have one pathological characteristic doesn't mean that with respect to one particular pathway, doesn't mean that pathway governs everything with respect to obesity. So
does insulin not have that effect of acting like like turning the fat cell into a one-way turnstile? And if it does have that effect, then like how do people continue to lose fat when insulin is elevated with like carbohydrate consumption?
Okay, yeah. So insulin does definitely turn up the ability for fat cells to take up fat. However, fat itself, in the absence of insulin, or with some basal level of insulin, because we're always secreting some insulin, and that's even better. We always have some insulin. And then if you go on a ketogenic diet, maybe you get about half as much insulin secretion over the course of the day, but you're always having some compared to a high carb diet. But that aside, simply elevations in triglyceride and free fatty acid content in the blood can increase the uptake of fat into the blood, into the fat cell. So just because you might have lower insulin, you might have higher fat in the blood, which you're going to tend to have on a higher fat diet, lower carb diet. Just after a meal, you're going to have higher fat, and that itself will sort of push the triglycerides and fat into the blood. And Kevin Hall knows a lot about this, and that's where I learned that from. But you also mentioned, so how do people lose weight on a high insulinogenic diet? Whenever they're having a lot of insulin around? Well, it's just that even though they might have a lot of insulin around, that insulin is it might not necessarily be being used to put fat into fat cells. There might not necessarily be a lot available. It might just be being used to work for carbohydrate metabolism, to push carbohydrates into cells that need glucose. And then and just think about it like this, there are, say take two diets that are equally insulinogenic, but take one diet that's like less palatable, less ultra processed, and has a lower, say, calorie density. If you simply eat fewer calories on the diet that is less palatable, has lower calorie density, which will happen spontaneously on diets that are less palatable and have lower calorie density, less processed diets in general, then you're just not going to have as much fat gain, even though you might have more carbohydrate or more insulin being secreted compared to a low carb, high fat diet. So in that case, there simply just may not be enough substrate, and yeah, it's more of a brain level issue of how much food am I being driven to eat, as opposed to an insulin level issue. Of course, insulin can definitely affect the brain and drive some hunger as well. There's no question about that. But it's not entirely about insulin, and insulin is probably only a modest part of the overall picture compared to simply like wanting to eat delicious foods or overeat foods or not being satisfied. So I'm not sure if that was an adequate answer, but
it's just interesting because it's like you see bodybuilders all the time getting shredded on hypocaloric diets. In other words, while by making use of the calorie deficit, but they generally eat copious carbohydrates, right? So it's like it's just this interesting thing, like how I'm not sure how people in for example, the keto camp or the low carb community continue to believe that you can't lose fat while insulin is elevated. Because to me, it just seems very obvious that fat loss can occur while you're consuming carbohydrates. You just have to be in a calorie deficit.
Yeah, I mean, and bodybuilders still to this day, one of the main kinds of diets that bodybuilders eat, especially like elite bodybuilders, is often a low fat, high carbohydrate diet. I even know some bodybuilders who are like massive, like 250 plus pounds and shredded, who actually inject insulin because they get to be so big they can't even make enough insulin it's like incredibly unhealthy, but they actually inject insulin in order to have enough insulin to get everything into their their cells. And they're completely shredded. So they're not eating more than whatever their body needs, even though their insulin levels are extremely high. And obviously it's terribly unhealthy. But because they're not eating more than their body, because they're giant muscles, but they're not eating more than what's necessary to maintain those muscles, they're not gaining fat. They're like sub 10% body fat. So it's like way more complicated than insulin, and calorie intake just is like the overwhelming part of the equation. I think most scientists would say. That isn't to say but I don't want people to think I'm just like advocating for like a willpower, calories in, calories out model. Hormones don't matter. That would be total nonsense. That is total nonsense. Obviously, there's many biological mechanisms that determine how much food you're going to want to take in when you become satisfied. There's many hormones that govern these processes that are modulated by whatever different kinds of foods that you eat. And which is why if you go on a more healthy diet, it's suddenly spontaneously much easier to eat fewer calories and then lose weight. And that's a biological process that we really don't fully understand. So definitely hormones and food quality and all those other things matter. But it's just not insulin by itself. It's so much more than insulin, and insulin is just really a modest part of the overall equation. I would say maybe like 10% of the overall equation compared to all the other factors that are important.
Yeah. So what would you say is a high-level strategy for somebody looking to, go from maybe not necessarily obese, but overweight to having a nice, healthy body composition? You already mentioned upgrading food quality, I think. But yeah, are there any other sort of pointers, strategies, tools?
You know what I would say? Probably first line, this is going to be this is already what all the celebrities are doing, right? Like take a GLP-1 agonist.
Are you talking about Ozempic?
Yeah.
Okay, break this down for us. Why are all the celebrities seemingly talking about this drug?
Because it allows you to maintain less body fat with less effort. Because everybody, even lean people, or most people, there's some people who are very, very skinny and they don't have to even try. And that's obviously everybody hates those people, but most people, in order to maintain this ideal figure that they want, it takes effort. And the reason is because, there's things around you that you want to eat that you can't eat. Like they look delicious. Sometimes you're hungry, you have an urge and you just can't eat them. If you eat them, you're going to lose what you're working on. Well, this new drug, it's really revolutionizing weight loss and obesity medicine in a way that was really unexpected. I don't think scientists even 5 to 10 years ago would have even predicted that something like this was going to be possible. So it's really unprecedented and was unexpected even to scientists. But this drug, it binds to what's called a GLP-1 receptor, which is just a receptor on the outside of the cell. It binds to this hormone called GLP-1. I think it's glucagon-like peptide 1, if I'm recalling correctly. And there's many different cells that express this. There's some in the gut, some in the brain. But long story short, it's the cells in the brain, and particularly with regard to and with respect to eating behavior, metabolic homeostasis, et cetera, in the brain, that this hormone binds to those cells. It causes the brain simply to, this is a little bit complex, but I think what people report whenever they are on this drug is that they can say, let's say that you have an eating problem, and you're extremely obese, you have a giant pizza that's given to you. And normally these people would often say want to eat the whole pizza, but they find themselves satisfied at 2 or 3 slices and almost just not even wanting to eat anymore. So it's almost making them a lot more like what's more normal. And it may be that it's turning off some of that reward circuitry that's causing them to just be constantly rewarded and constantly crave. And interestingly, these drugs are now being trialed for things like alcohol abuse disorder and gambling disorder and things like that, other sort of addictive addiction disorders, which suggests that maybe the circuitry for wanting to overeat has a lot of overlap with circuitry for other addiction disorders. So, but the interesting and cool thing, which is why all the celebrities are using this drug now, which again mimics a hormone, but you just give it in higher doses. The reason the celebrities are using it now is because it works on everybody. So anybody who there's a continuum of degree to which we're all seeking food reward. Even people who are maybe even on the lower end of that continuum, if you give them some of this drug, they'll even be lower than they were. So then it'll just be suddenly easy for somebody who was relatively lean to be very lean all the time if that's what they're wanting to do. And if you're a celebrity and you have the money to do that, that's what they do. But what's interesting is, as far as we know, and we've had now years and years of randomized controlled trials, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of trial participants, lots of epidemiology, like looking for potentially negative effects. As far as we know, the worst side effects tend to be things like nausea, which often can be mitigated by slowly increasing the dose and not going too fast. And it doesn't have serious side effects, which is why it's so such a revolution. It's like it's causing these dramatic reductions in eating, maybe up to or over 20% of body weight taken off by the time you hit 1 to 2 years. So if you're 200 pounds, you can go down to like what? That would be like 160 pounds. And that's average reductions in body weight. So some people have 30% reductions in body weight. So going from 200 to 140 pounds. So going from being obese to literally basically a normal weight for some people. And effortlessly. They're not having nutrition education really, and most nutrition education isn't that good anyway. And they're just taking this drug and they're just eating in the normal food environment, and suddenly they're not as responsive to the normal food environment. So it works on everybody. So that's why celebrities are now abusing it and buying it up. And it's really going to revolutionize if the data come in as we're expecting. It's really going to revolutionize not even just obesity treatment, but probably just weight loss. Because in addition to these like big weight loss effects, the long-term studies that have come out so far, long-term data that have come out so far show like really dramatic reductions in like heart disease. I think you shared with me an abstract where they're looking at Alzheimer's disease now. Is that right? Didn't you share that with me? I think I think you sent me that where
I don't remember. I feel like we share so many different things back and forth.
I think you sent me like maybe 3 or 4 months ago an abstract where they're running a trial for Alzheimer's disease. So to reduce.
Yes. I do remember that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, because I think it makes it interesting in part because it's also used as a type 2 diabetes drug. So it could potentially, insofar as like blood sugar complications and the like are associated with increased risk for and glucose dysregulation in the brain in the setting of Alzheimer's disease, maybe it could be usple.
100%. Yeah. Population. Obesity causes brain inflammation. Obesity causes dysmetabolic effects in the brain, all this other stuff. So it helps with like pretty much every major Western disease. It doesn't seem to have many downsides. So it's a revolution. So that's what I would tell people if they have the money, if they're overweight and they're looking to lose weight and to do. Apart from that, if we're talking about lifestyle, honestly though, this is what I think. This is why I'm kind of like, I'm more interested now, personally becoming more interested now in like, how do we modulate nutrition for some of these other effects, like cognitive effects, et cetera? Like what kind of nutritional quality changes can we make for these other effects? And I'm a little less interested in weight loss just because I think that we're going to have a revolution in weight loss with these medications, especially if they get them down to a lower enough price. They're already looking at these cost benefit analyses to see if they get them down to like below $4,000 a year, then it becomes very cost beneficial even for these things to be widely prescribed, and then it's going to be a game changer. But that's what so I'm generally interested more in like food quality for producing other sorts of benefits to health that are obesity independent. But I would say if you're looking for like an old school traditional approach, which I think still most people are going to be doing for the next 5 or 10 years until these drugs are available in a widespread manner. If you're looking for an old school approach, there's a lot. I think the number one, I think you'll probably agree with me on this, the number one lever is probably to replace ultra processed foods with more whole foods, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And then honestly, I'm thinking, okay, I'm wondering if like, because I feel like you might even be more of an expert here at this point than me. Replace ultra processed foods would be the first step. Focus on foods with higher in fiber. So, well, honestly, yeah. Me, I like more of a plant-based approach. So I'm going to give you more of the plant-based orientations. But
unpack that. Why? Because we want to know. But also, before, I think this is so important because just going back to the drug topic for a second, don't the studies show that people who lose dramatic weight on this drug, once they come off of the drug, they tend to regain it. They tend to regain it, right?
Yeah, you'll regain the weight. It's not permanent.
So this conversation, I think, is like, it's not a separate conversation. Like it has to be had alongside the drug, because anybody who's even, who's thinking of using it, like they're going to need to put these healthy habits in place. Otherwise, when they come off the drug, unless they want to be tethered to the drug for life, which we don't know what the long-term health outcomes of that could potentially be, they're going to need to have these habits in place, right?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe I think the way the discussion is going is that people will probably be on the drug for life, and so personally, if I personally, my natural level of body fat is closer to like 20%. I can get down to below 15% if I work really, really hard, like super hard. Some people are closer to 15%. They can get down to 10% if they work really, really hard. For me, getting down to 10% it's possible, but it's like it would be a big battle to get there. If I could just take small doses of the drug for life and if I wanted to stay at 10%, say, I would. And
yeah,
I mean, some people have different philosophical reasons about this, and it's actually really interesting that you say this, because I hadn't really considered this too much in depth until like maybe just now, but I think there will be some resistance to taking a drug, maybe. But imagine this, Max. Let's say that you have this problem with overweight, and then you're struggling with it. Like if the drug helps you, I don't. Do you think most people will choose a higher weight?
No.
Over, say, taking a drug for life? I think most people will choose the drug.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I would. Maybe there's going to be a small number of people who wouldn't. I don't know. It's interesting. I haven't really thought about it.
I just think it's probably so much easier. It is so much easier to be able to take a shot, right? Like once a week. Isn't it once a week?
Yeah, but they're coming out with an oral form as well. So, or they're developing that. So it's believed that we will have an oral form as well, and it won't just need to be injected. So if we have that, then it's just taking a pill, like say every day. For the rest of your life, yeah, sure. But but for people who don't, okay, sure. The first thing is replacing ultra processed foods with whole foods. The second thing is probably getting all of the ultra processed foods out of your house, like literally just not having them. I can't have ultra processed foods in my house. I'm going to eat them first. Like that's the first thing I'm going to wake up and eat. It's like literally, I'm going to eat. If I have chips and like queso in my fridge, I'm gonna have chips and queso for breakfast. There's no question. So
I love that. I love the honesty.
So the first thing I would do is if I'm really working hard to get lower, I would never have those foods in my house ever. They're just not even allowed really to be in the house. And then you won't be tempted. And it becomes easier because then you'll just eat what you want to eat, et cetera. And it's less of an issue because you don't want to go out of your way to like go to the store and like whenever you're having a craving. Often people will just say, whatever, I'll just eat these nasty lentils and suffer. Instead.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I like lentils.
I like lentils too. I do. I love them. I know most people don't, but for some reason, a lot of people don't. It's really weird.
I like them. Yeah, I like them. Like the whole paleo thing of having to like get, to abstain from like beans and lentils, legumes and things like that. I never understood. I feel like these are really great foods, provided you tolerate them, right?
Yeah. I think they're awesome. I like the taste. I like the way they make me feel. You can eat like too many, but if you're not eating too many, then you should be fine. So I don't understand. I don't know. Maybe just people who don't want to eat their vegetables, or maybe like, I don't know. Some people like believe this stuff. I guess that's another whole, like the lectins or
Rabbit
whatever.
hole.
It's gonna. I don't understand.
Yeah.
But not good. Not a lot of good evidence. But yeah. So that's the way I would do for those 2 steps. Would be like my main 2 steps. Keep consistent exercise, especially with respect to resistance training, some kind of resistance training, because you want to maintain muscle as you keep a lower body weight. If you lose weight too often and too much, you cycle, and then you're not also lifting, you can like destroy your body composition, and you'll actually end up looking worse because you won't have any muscle. And this goes for men and women. So even with some women who like there's many women who don't have a lot of muscle who like look like tons better, like really much more attractive whenever they add like 20 pounds of muscle. Like it's so it's something both men and women want to do, and you also want to do that to maintain a muscle for later in life, because if you don't, then you can lose function later in life, and that's a disaster. That's not something that's fun. So maintaining muscle early in life is really important for maintaining health later. So that I guess that's the third part of it. And then we can all talk about some smaller issues. So maybe protein intake. Protein intake is important. It's important for maintaining muscle. If you have lower protein intakes over time, you're going to have lower muscle eventually, because you're not going to be able to maintain the muscle whenever you get sick, and then you need higher protein intakes in order to because you have higher protein needs, for example, you're going to take that from the muscle. Or if you, again, are losing weight sometimes, again, you're going to take more protein from the muscle. So a higher protein diet can help you to maintain more muscle, but it can also, if you're very well adherent to such a diet, maybe it can reduce weight by about 5 pounds, 5 to 10 pounds at most, 10 pounds at most. I think it's the more realistic estimate on average is maybe about 5 pounds additional fat loss of a higher protein diet versus a lower protein diet, assuming somebody is very adherent. So it's helpful in that respect. It's not a massive effect, but it's a modest effect, and it's meaningful.
Got it.
Yeah, higher fiber intake. You can go too high, but definitely higher than, I think even the recommendations are a little bit low, but maybe that's my like sort of plant-based background bias. I think that going above 40 grams is good. Like up to 80.
40. 80 seems like a lot to me, but 40 seems reasonable.
I mean, I have no trouble going over 100. I actually have to reduce fiber more and more because I eat too much food now. Like I'm trying to get up because I've been gaining a lot of weight for good reasons. I've been trying to bulk up. But if you're smaller, I think higher intakes are okay, because the less overall food that you have to take in, then you can tolerate more fiber. If you're bigger, you probably have to have a lower fiber intake. That's been my personal experience, and that makes sense because you just have more food going through. But yeah, like up to, I think between 40 and 80 is good for most people. Higher is better. I think the higher you can tolerate probably is maybe the best. There's some debate in the literature about what traditional peoples ate as far as their fiber intake, but it could get pretty high in some traditional populations, like over 100 grams per day. But they were very lean and they weren't eating a lot often.
And fiber, what makes fiber so beneficial? There's probably many reasons why fiber is beneficial, but it's like it's very satiating because it helps stretch out the stomach. And are there other reasons? Sure.
So this is where my PhD project comes in. Me and you have had to push this off a few times because I'm like trying to graduate eventually, like finally graduate with my PhD. I'm going to do that hopefully in like 2 or 3 months. That'll be awesome.
It's so impressive, dude. I can't even imagine what like the workload, course load must be like for somebody who's like trying to get both an MD and a PhD at the same time as you are.
Yeah.
It's very commendable.
Basically it's a lot of suffering. It's been a lot. Yeah. But, it's been a lot. It's lots of suffering, but maybe good suffering. I don't know. But,
it'll be worth it in the end for sure. For sure.
We'll see.
Just like it's a lot.
We'll see. Yeah, no, I'm happy with where it's taken me. I'm happy with what I've become, who I've become. That's a whole nother conversation. But it's a lot. But I will say. So this is where my PhD comes in. So for what our lab often works on is actually fiber. How does fiber affect health? And we work on some receptors, some transporters that take some of the microbiome, the bacteria in the gut. They process fiber and they turn it into often what's called a short chain fatty acid. So butyrate, acetate, propionate are the main ones. There's others, but these are some of the main ones. And butyrate in particular has been looked at a lot by us and by other labs, especially over the last 10 years. And it's now believed, based on our work and some other evidence, that butyrate plays a really important role in gut health, in particular maybe prevention of inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, but also in the prevention of colon cancer through... In my belief, and this is what we're going to maybe write in my dissertation or maybe even in publication, my belief is the mechanism through the reason that it does this is that butyrate sends a signal to the immune cells of the gut saying, hey, everything here is okay. Everything here is fine. Normal processes are happening. When you don't have butyrate coming in, that means that there's like some sort of infection. Means there's something going wrong with your microbiome, that the wrong microbes are there. And the body's like, oh my God, red alert. Something's going on inside here. We have to defend ourselves. So if you don't have butyrate being produced, and under normal circumstances, you would have butyrate being produced because normal circumstances are eating a relatively high fiber diet. Only recently in the past, 100 years have super low fiber diets become commonplace, but traditionally everybody would be on a much higher fiber diet than most people eat today. And if you don't have those signals coming in with butyrate that's produced by fiber, your body thinks something's wrong, so you'll have a more chronically inflamed state of the gut. And so this might predispose you towards the development of colon diseases, of intestinal diseases, but also cancers, because the more inflammation you have in your gut, the more predisposed you're going to have be towards cancer, because inflammation plays a really important role for cancer. And we've shown this in mouse studies, mouse models. Eventually, we're going to have to take it to drugs and into things that help to produce butyrate in humans. But yeah, so even apart from weight loss, butyrate and fiber may play a really important role in the maintenance of long-term health and even quality of life, especially with respect to the inflammatory diseases of the gut. So fiber is a really good thing for those reasons, for sure.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
What is the average intake in the U.S., do you know, for fiber?
I want to say like 20 grams a day, something like really low. Like
it has to be lower.
Looking at this, I was like,
that.
how do you get that low? How is it even possible? How do people even achieve that? Like you have to eat like one piece of bread or something. Like, let me see. I have like bread here. Not to say you necessarily need to eat bread, but like how much like 2 grams of dietary fiber in the bread, right? Okay, that's a lot.
Is it whole? Is it like a whole grain bread?
This is whole grain bread, but like. So many foods, whole foods contain fiber. It's just that people are eating like almost zero whole foods on average. It's incredible. It's really incredible. It's like hard to even believe that to me, because I'm like, I've just never eaten like that. Well, I did when I was like a little kid. We ate like microwave food all the time, like Hot Pockets and Bagel Bites. That's all we ever ate. It's terrible. But like as an adult, not eating kid foods, man, it's crazy. Like 20, it's really, really low. But yeah.
So you eat fiber. ideally from, fresh whole fruits, produce, and the like. And the fiber, how does this work? The fiber makes its way down to the large intestine, and we get butyrate from that?
Yeah. So your body itself cannot digest the fiber. You don't have the metabolic machinery to break it down in your gut. So it travels to the colon, where there are these little guys that do break it down. Now, they don't break down a ton, so we're not cows. Cows like live off of fiber, where their gut microbes actually break it down, and that's where they get a lot of their energy from. We're humans, so we don't ferment tons and tons of fiber. That's why we have, like we were talking earlier, maybe 80 grams or 100 grams is kind of the limit. But we do ferment some, and those microbes take the fiber and they have the metabolic machinery to metabolize it. So they then turn it into these short chain fatty acids, which our body cells can then absorb and they can metabolize. Interestingly, and this is just like my PhD, I don't know if anybody else will be interested in this, but for my PhD, we've shown that ketogenesis might play a really important role here too. And we're getting into nerdland, so I'm going to keep it short. But it's traditionally thought that the liver is what creates ketones and has all these ketogenic machinery, et cetera. But actually, the gut, the colon, can create ketones as well, just like the liver can. And that generation of ketones from the butyrate from the fiber is actually a really, really important part of the health. Probably a really, really important part of the health benefits from fiber. So maybe ketones are they are definitely very, very beneficial for the gut, and that's the process by which those benefits are produced, is through ultimately the generation of ketones in the gut.
Dude, no, that's amazing, because we know the potential benefits that ketone bodies have on the brain, right? Because they act as a fuel. They have all these signaling effects. We've talked in the past. I did a podcast episode with Dom D'Agostino, who came on. He talked all about the signaling effects of these ketone bodies. They can increase blood flow to the brain. They can upregulate BDNF. But it's always been, I guess, difficult to reconcile that with, like, okay, well, unless I want to be in chronic ketosis, how do I get those benefits? Am I just supposed to be drinking like MCT oil in my coffee, or like what? But this is really cool, because what this suggests is that all the benefits that we see associated with plant-rich diets, some of those benefits might be attributable to ketone bodies produced by plants in the gut. That's insane.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It is really funny how those two threads get wound together. 100%. And some people, I shouldn't feed the crazy people here, but I will, because whatever. But some people think that, okay, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it because I'm already saying it.
Say it.
Some people think that maybe some of the ketones produced during a ketogenic diet, even though they might not be eating any fiber, they may be able to replace some of the effects of butyrate on gut health, because it's ultimately in part, maybe mostly, but at least in part, the ketones that cause the beneficial effects of fiber on the gut. So they think, oh, it's okay. Maybe I can just like not eat any fiber and just have high ketones and I'll be okay. And it may be true, but it might not be true. I don't know. But it's funny. So some people, So anyway.
Very interesting. Wow. So cool. I can't wait to see like what you publish, like, based on this. Like it's a badass thread.
Interestingly, and this is an aside, but interestingly, ketones are also super important for pretty much all the body's processes. If you knock out ketone production in the heart, if you knock out ketone production in various organs, the animal will die. Ketones have a really important role to play in normal physiology throughout the body. And I'm really excited about, publishing soon for after my because I thought, man, through most of the PhD, I thought I was a loser. Like, I was just terrible. But at the end, like, we're finally maybe going to put together a good story. So that's nice.
So freaking cool.
Don't ever do a PhD ever. Never. Nobody. If anybody out there is listening and thinking about doing a PhD, don't. Like,
don't do it.
Unless you really if you don't like yourself, then you should do it. But otherwise, don't do it.
But somebody's got to do it. So thank you for doing it and pushing the science forward. Okay, so fiber definitely important. We've established that. You've mentioned a few times you have this you have a tendency to lean towards a more plant-based approach. But you've also, on social media, you post all the time the value of protein and the value of certain nutrients that seem to be found exclusively in animal products. And so where and you've acknowledged that all animal products are not unhealthy. So what's walk us through your thinking there, and with regard to plant-based eating versus a more balanced omnivorous approach.
I like how you said it was more balanced omnivorous approach. I'm like okay, all right.
Well, that's the thing is that for some public health seems to give these plant exclusive diets a pass.
Yeah.
Ignoring the fact that they cut out an entire food group of very nutrient dense foods. And to me, it's just a very fringe approach that doesn't often get acknowledged as such.
Yeah. It's because it's politically correct.
Yeah.
That's the reason it's politically correct. Actually, I even know some people also who are in the plant-based world who will just tell you that they see this, that it's because it's politically correct that a lot of this stuff happens. But okay. So the first reason that I'll first start by just talking about a little bit about the kind of person I am. So the kind of person I am, whether I like it or not, or anybody else likes it or not, is I like to find exceptions. I like to find edge cases. I like to explore those exceptions and edge cases. I like to find sort of what people aren't looking at. And that's what excites me. It's a lot to do with my cognitive processing type or my personality type. It's sort of playing devil's advocate. It's just that's who I am, at the core of who I am. So if you ever follow me on social media, you'll readily see that. It doesn't always necessarily come out, but I just love to ask questions and well, wait a second, and then try to find the weaknesses of different positions. It's just something I love to do. So personally, from a personal perspective, I love plant-based diets because, so the first reason is, so it mainly started with ethical issues. So I really hated the idea of factory farming and how they would, mistreat animals, especially smaller animals like chickens and pigs, because it seems wrong to lock these animals up in tiny little cages for their entire lives, and that's the entire life that they get to live. They're not doing the sorts of behaviors that are their species specific behaviors that they're supposed to be doing, that they have instincts to be doing. They're being prevented from doing those behaviors, and I can't imagine that they're very happy most of the time. Maybe some of the animals are. So I have a guinea pig, or my daughter has a guinea pig, and this guinea pig literally just if you take it out of its cage, it'll just sit there for hours in the same spot. But I think most animals are not like that. And it's kind of wrong to treat them like that, in my opinion. So I wanted a way of eating that didn't participate in that. I didn't want to contribute to that. So
by the way, I'm completely sympathetic to that, and I agree with you. I just want to put that out there. Everything that you've just said, I completely agree with.
Right. So at that point, I got into stuff like pasture raised and stuff like grass fed, and I did that for a long time. But then I started to also just because I wanted to explore things after that point, but also because so there's this whole issue of for example, with beef, how are we going to expand beef production so that if everybody had to eat the same amount of beef as Americans eat, like we just don't have enough land in the world to do that. Populations are growing. So my perspective and my point of view, and this may be not the original reason I got into it. I probably just got into it because I was just exploring things and interested. But my point of view now is that, and there's a lot of caveats here, and I know you've posted about this, and there's such a conversation to be had here, but I'm just like putting this out, and we can have that if we need to or if we want to. We probably need to eat less. It's probably better for ecosystems to eat less. We probably don't need to be mowing down the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. That's probably not a good thing. It's probably a bad thing. It's probably better to have more trees and more forests and stuff like that. So we could talk about regenerative agriculture, all that stuff, but my understanding is that we probably need to eat less beef, for example, in order to be better for the environment. In short, we can discuss this if we want to. But so as a result of that, I just started being more interested in sort of a plant-based approach. Also, just because like the plant-based gurus were telling you that like you'd solve all diseases if you went plant-based. I was like, okay, I'll try it. Let's see what happens. Like, well, I want to explore this. I was just interested and curious. So I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to Ornish or those guys, those legendary.
Oh God.
No, they're obviously. I don't want to say bad things, but yeah, we don't need to talk about them. But I went down that path for a while, and it's plant-based diets are. I liked what I was doing. I liked the groups of people that I was getting to meet. I thought the ethics behind it were good. But then I started, being myself, which is, hey, okay, so I'm doing this one thing, but let's like find the weaknesses to it. So what are the potential downsides for a plant-based diet? Well, I started looking in the literature. One thing is that plant-based eaters tend to eat substantially less protein. And this is the case in whatever population we're talking about, whether it's in America or Germany or Australia or France. Like plant-based eaters, vegetarians, tend to eat less protein. And that's for obvious reasons, right? If you're eating beans and wheat, you're not going to get as much protein as somebody who eats a lot of beef and ham or whatever. So they're getting less protein. Well, so then I asked, well, okay, they're getting less protein. Are they actually also maybe having less muscle? And it turns out that probably there's not a lot of really high quality studies, but the studies that we do have, many of the studies that we do have tend to point to plant-based eaters having less muscle. I know anecdotally, whenever I tried to gain muscle eating like a really low protein diet, it didn't work. Like it was really not, like it just didn't work very well. And then everybody knows anecdotally, like the really frail looking vegans. And so I think there's some definite truth to this. And I think that if we had more higher quality research, it would show this very clearly. And if you look even deeper into the literature, you find that in order to maintain proper amounts of muscle mass in old age, you actually need a substantially higher amount of protein than, say, the dietary guidelines recommend. Well, guess what? Vegans are probably getting even less than omnivores, and omnivores probably aren't even getting enough. So at least definitely in older age, and probably even in the younger age, it's going to impact how much muscle you have, especially if you're at a calorie deficit. And vegans tend to eat fewer calories as well, so they tend to be leaner. So then they're also eating less protein. So I think in terms of maintaining muscle mass, there definitely is a really big downside to veganism, or at least vegetarian diets as most people consume them. There's ways to compensate for this, but the average typical vegetarian, the average typical vegetarian is educated, they're going to be consuming less protein and probably at higher risk for having lower amounts of muscle mass. So that's one downside. It's a really real downside. I like literally like fought the vegans online for such a long time to point this out. Eventually, like they started like saying that I was right, but then they wouldn't say it was because I said it. They like pretended it had nothing to do with me. And I'm still a bad person as always because I'm questioning their diet. But they still like follow me and pay really close attention. Whatever.
Well, because I feel like you're in a position similar to me where it becomes apparent how much more difficult it is to toe the middle line, the more balanced line where, suddenly everybody is hating what you're putting out, right? Like the vegans, the carnivores, the paleo. You know, I say I enjoy legumes occasionally. Like the paleo people are going to come out. You know,
you're a terrible person. How can you say that?
And I try to stick to the evidence, but I'm very skeptical about seed oils being this health boon. So then I've got the evidence-based people. You know, 99% of what I say could be completely accurate in accordance with the data, but I come out semi against. Well, I guess not semi, but I come out against seed oils, and suddenly I'm a quack to them. So it's like, you know, it's just towing that middle line is like, I think that's the most difficult thing to do, and I think you do it really well. But that's why you might be prone to getting more criticism at times.
Yeah, there's tribes, man. They're all in these dumb tribes, and they're all certain that they're right, and everybody wants to be a part of a tribe because you don't want to well, first of all, there's safety. So you can just listen to what somebody else says and then say it. And then you're like safe because you know, like your tribe is right. So then I'm safe if I just know that my tribe is right. So that's nice. And then also just not getting attacked is nice. So like most people are tribal. Most people have their little tribes and most people will defend these tribes and it's pretty bad. But yeah, like I do it because I can't help not do it. Like I'm not the kind of person to try to fit in because I want to fit in. I'm the kind of person to try to find like the other side of things. So I'm always going to be like having somebody who disagrees with me because I'm always trying to find like, what do they not know? What are other people wrong about? I'm always looking for that. And there's good reasons for doing that too, because if we're talking about vegan diets or vegetarian diets and plant-based diets in the first place, right? We're talking about protein intake, right? Like let's say I want to be a plant-based eater and I want to do it in such a way that I don't have negative health consequences. Well, then having this information from somebody who's maybe looking at things a little bit different can help people to eat a plant-based diet in a healthier way so that they don't have these negative consequences. So instead of being like tribal and being like, oh, I want to like protect my vegan tribe and like be angry at anybody who says protein might be beneficial for health, you can be like, hey, I just want to like find what's going to help people and people can make their own decisions and they'll actually have better health than if I like lie to them about what the evidence says. But I don't know, man, like people for whatever reason, they value their tribes more than the truth. But okay, so I'm passionate personally, and I've changed my personal passion for like trying to find the flip side of things. I'm personally passionate about making plant-based diets better. So what can we find out about the current weaknesses of plant-based diets? What can we find about the current weaknesses of plant-based diets that would make plant-based eating more healthy than it is now on average? And it is unhealthy, I think, in a lot of ways on average. So that's just protein. Protein is the first one. But there's a lot of other nutrients that are relatively deficient in plant-based diets. Vitamin A. So there's a lot of assumptions made about vitamin A in plant-based diets. People think that if you eat these carotenes, they're been converted into vitamin A, retinol. There's and there's individual differences in how much you convert. So some people don't convert much. Some people convert a lot more.
You're talking about beta carotene, right? Which is pro-vitamin A. Everybody knows it's found in carrots, sweet potatoes, and things like that.
Yeah, but there's wide divergences and variation in how much vitamin A might be optimal for health. We actually don't really know. Like scientists really don't know how much vitamin A is optimal. Like most of the recommendations for vitamins and minerals are based on really rough estimates and really old studies that are not really good with respect to health outcomes. They're actually quite terrible. They're like not even good at all with respect to health outcomes. Most vitamin and mineral recommendations. So we think that maybe people on average are maybe getting enough beta carotene to get enough retinol. We don't know that that's actually the case for everybody because everybody has different rates of conversion. And also we don't know exactly how much retinol people actually need. But we do know that if you're an animal, if you eat more animals, you get a lot more retinol, like naturally. You don't have to have the beta carotene, you get the retinol directly. So what's the difference between plant-based eaters and omnivores with respect to that vitamin in particular? We know, for example, that, what was it? So I recently saw a study where they supplement with vitamin A, with retinol in particular. Is it malaria? It's measles. So with measles, there was a 1988 I want to say Lancet. I was a Lancet or New England Journal of Medicine randomized controlled trial where they took kids with measles. They gave them vitamin A, and they saw that the kids who got the retinol, the vitamin A, did way better with respect to their measles outcomes, like way fewer health complications, much healthier, et cetera, than the ones who weren't receiving vitamin A supplements. These were omnivores. These are omnivorous children. So imagine if these were plant-based children. Now, of course, measles doesn't rampage through populations, but the point is that there's health functions and health modulating properties of these different vitamins and minerals that we really have only scratched the surface about. And so whenever people say, oh, plant-based diets are like perfectly healthy for everybody, they're saying that on the basis of no evidence. We really have really crude evidence. If you think of like the old video games of like the Atari, et cetera, this tiny number of pixels, it's very grainy. It's like our evidence is even worse than that in terms of what we're seeing. It's definitely not like really high resolution. We don't see very much with our current level of evidence. And yet people can make these dogmatic claims about, and the reason, by the way, that retinol does that is because it modulates like membrane permeability, it modulates immune cells. It does all sorts of really important things with respect to immunity. So what happens with people who are getting other kinds of infections who have low intakes of retinol, low intakes of vitamin A, or there are low converters of beta carotene, or are eating vegan junk food, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at vegan diets, they're deficient they're deficient. They have lower intakes and deficient in some cases across a really wide range of different vitamins and minerals. So retinol may be one of those. That's one of the edge cases. That's one of the areas we don't really understand that well, but there are other cases that are actually much more clear. So for example, iron. So iron, the rate of iron deficiency in plant-based eaters is much higher than it is in omnivores. In every population you look at, if you're looking at India, you're looking at America, it's like across different populations, it's much higher. Well, if you have low iron levels, first off, you can get anemia. But second, you can get like depressed because you have low iron levels, you're anemic, and so you feel terrible. And yet, whenever I mentioned that on to people, I was like, maybe this is the reason some vegans don't feel that well is because they have low iron levels. Like, no, iron's not involved in that. Like, no, that's wrong. I have a PhD. You should stop posting about this. And it's crazy. People are crazy, but it's like, yeah. Anyway, so it's like that for zinc. It's like
right.
So
don't vegans all wouldn't. Yeah. Don't they argue that like omnivores are, your average omnivore is deficient in a bunch of nutrients as well? Like what's their sort of counterpoint to that?
Do they say that? I mean, yeah. There are some vitamins I think that vegans have higher intakes of than omnivores. I think maybe vitamin C might be one. There's a couple of them. There's like three. There's definitely more that like there's definitely 2 or 3 times more number of vitamins and minerals that vegans tend to be low in than omnivores. But yeah, there's a few. And I think the answer to that is not too hard, although it is, we should acknowledge that, which, right? But the answer to that is probably people need to eat more whole plant foods instead of eating like honey buns and stuff. I love honey buns, but like don't eat as, replace them with like oatmeal and other stuff that is going to be more. And then I think you can sort of correct that. Like I think vegans tend to eat more fruits and vegetables, and those are definitely really important for health, right? They definitely have an advantage there. Vegans probably have better lipid profiles. So maybe with respect to so long as you maintain a good body composition and don't get too much visceral fat, like maybe with respect to cardiovascular disease risk, vegans might do a little bit better. It depends though. There might be other deficiencies or other things that might make them do worse. But overall, having better lipids is better than having worse lipids, right? So there's some things that vegans and vegetarians have better, but it's not clear necessarily that a plant-based diet is necessarily healthier if everything else is doing well. So, for example, if you look at those studies on showing that plant-based diets cause better health outcomes, with respect to cardiovascular disease risk, that may be real, or it may just be because vegans, vegetarians, or plant-based dieters they tend to be more health conscious. So if you compare if somebody who's equally health conscious with those groups, then you may not see as much of an effect or no effect at all with respect to those outcomes. And
you also mentioned that they tend to eat less in general, which may be contributing to the observed health that we see, right? Like
100%. 100%. Yeah.
They're eating less.
Yeah. Vegans and vegetarians are like, they're like 2 or 3 BMI points lower than their counterparts, omnivores. They're like much leaner.
Wow.
Some of that's muscle mass, but some of that's probably also fat. So yeah, that's going to make an impact on long-term health, especially if you carry less fat over time, over a longer period of time. Yeah. So yeah, there are some advantages for sure. I mean, but like, why not also ask the question, what are the disadvantages so that you can have both? Like you can have the good things from both. Like that's what I'm always asking about, because I want to make plant-based diets better. And I want to ask, like, how do we maybe fortify or supplement plant-based diets with things that are good that we get from meat to make people healthier on plant-based diets? Because personally, if I go vegan, I feel like crap. I feel just horrific. So I want to help people not to feel that way. And I know a lot of people feel that way on a vegan diet. Like people can say, oh, like people get so mad whenever we say this, like people hear this or people find out I said this, like they'll get so mad, like, no, that's like an anecdote. That's not true. But everybody knows this. Everybody knows that so many people feel like crap on vegan diets. Like it's not just hard to maintain because you can't have your bacon. It's hard to maintain because a lot of people feel like crap whenever they eat this way. So like, what if we could just help people not feel like crap? Why do we have to deny that people feel like crap? Because we want to like, no, don't find out that people like feel like crap. No, you don't really feel like crap. You're making that up. No, just like try to help people with like what people probably feel like crap. A lot of people do. So
yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, I see it all the time.
Vegans,
I'm not.
By the way, vegans have like a rate of depression, like double the amount of omnivores. It's like double the rate of depression. Yeah, and then what they'll say like, oh, it's not really the vegan diet. It's because they care so much. They get depressed because they care so much. And I'm just like, dude, what if it is the vegan diet? We need to really be careful about that, because if you're just like gaslighting people about their diet because they care so much, but it's actually the vegan diet itself, but then you're recommending the vegan diet and you're not really taking that concern seriously, then you're doing people a disservice. Because we want to take that concern seriously so that we can avoid people becoming depressed, because being depressed is the worst thing in the world. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's like one of the worst possible things you can experience is being depressed. So wouldn't you be concerned that people might be getting depressed because of nutrient deficiencies? But no, people aren't, because it's politically incorrect. Damn. It's politically incorrect.
I love that rant. I mean, yeah, 100%, because that's what they're doing. They're gaslighting.
Yes.
Or like, if you feel like crap on a vegan diet, I think that what you'll often hear is, well, they didn't do it correctly, Oh,
I could scream about this one, because that is the worst, because every diet tribe does that, by the way. Every single one of these stupid diet tribes does that argument. Everybody. The carnivores do it. The keto people do it. Everybody's like, oh, you're not doing it right. This is the perfect diet. The only way you could feel bad is if you're not doing it right. That's the only way. There's nothing wrong with this. Stop it. You're wrong. Ban button. Get out of our forums. You're not allowed to say you don't feel good. This is every cult does this. Not even diet tribe, but like meditation people do. Like Buddhists do this. Like meditation, pro meditation people. Oh, you're not meditating right because you don't feel like amazing when you meditate. They all do this. So that is the worst argument, because it's like, why can't people just acknowledge maybe there's ways you can get better? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. There's also been this interesting, I feel like, evolution where at first, the vegan talking points were that some of the vegan talking points were that all animal fats are bad and that dietary cholesterol is bad. Then we started to see that, and by the way, correct me if I'm wrong here on any of these points that I'm about to make, but then we started to see that dietary cholesterol maybe wasn't so bad, and so that stopped being as prominent of a talking point. And then the evidence started to show that, okay, well, fish fat seems to be very beneficial. So then now fish started to get a pass, right? So they started to attack fish less. And now all of a sudden, I feel like dairy, it's starting to come to public awareness that dairy fat is also, maybe with the exception of butter, which we could talk about, but that's besides the point. In general, dairy fat seems to be beneficial, right? Like paradoxically, full fat dairy seems to be associated with better cardiometabolic health as opposed to like low fat and fat free dairy. And so the last bastion is beef fat, still seems to be the boogeyman as far as the vegan, zealots are concerned. But it does seem to be the case that like this whole thing that animal fat is the worst thing for us, for our health, it seems to be sort of coming to light that that's not necessarily true.
So,
What do you think about that?
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't have strong opinions on this. I can tell you what I think. So I think let's talk about dietary cholesterol. Let's start with dietary cholesterol, and let's start with eggs, for example, because eggs are sort of the diet. They're actually a really interesting case, right? Because eggs not only are really high in dietary cholesterol, but they're also really high in things like choline, which is maybe really important for the brain, and maybe really helpful for brain function, as me and you have been talking about recently. And so what do we do about eggs? Like, what do we do? Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that most people, maybe between 50 and 80% of people, maybe as many as 80%, if they eat more dietary cholesterol than what they're already eating as a normal part of a background omnivore diet, they're not going to get higher cholesterol levels from eating more. So they're not going to get elevations in what's called LDL cholesterol. Since they're not going to get elevations in LDL cholesterol, they're not going to be at a higher risk of cardiovascular disease if they eat eggs. There's a lot of different ways to look at this particular issue, but like the first thing I'll say is like most people don't know what kind of person they are with respect to eggs. Like most people don't know if you're a hyper responder or not. I don't think most people like test that. That's the first thing I say. So historically, I don't know if I'd maintain this position anymore. I'm eating more eggs lately, but traditionally I would say like overall it's probably not like why mess with it, because some people can get higher LDL cholesterol levels. But the other aspect of this discussion is it also depends on what your background diet is, right? So if you're looking at epidemiological studies, some studies show no harm of eggs. No, it's like not harmful. Some studies even show maybe even they're better for you than not having eggs. And some studies show harm. It's probably because it depends on the background diet. So if you have a really healthy background diet, then maybe eggs, maybe in those people who have elevations of LDL cholesterol, it might be harmful with respect to say heart health. But if you have a relatively not good background diet, then they're not going to be harmful or maybe even beneficial. And then they might be beneficial for your brain because they're increasing your choline, and choline is probably really important for improving brain function, even quickly, right? You'll probably quickly improve your brain function, like within a few weeks. So I like eggs. I personally, this is not going to resonate with your listeners probably. Oh, you're going to say something?
I was going to ask if I don't want to cut you off, but I did want to ask, is there a way to test to see whether or not you are a hyper responder or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty easy. Like if you have the time, you have the inclination, you could maybe not eat any eggs and you can maybe not eat eggs and eat your normal diet, and then have your blood tested, your LDL cholesterol, you see, and then maybe eat six eggs a day for a week, or however many eggs that you want to eat. So you want to eat two a day, right? Then eat 2 a day, and then have it tested again and see if your LDL cholesterol changes. If it doesn't change, then you're safe in that respect.
Doesn't it? It's my understanding. I mean, I think I probably heard this from an expert who I trust. I haven't like vetted this in the literature, but that it may change your LDL cholesterol, but in the short term, as your liver compensates, right? Like if you start eating more dietary cholesterol, you're going to absorb more, and then your liver might not necessarily respond right away with regard to producing less, but over the long term, it has you won't see as much of an effect. But in the short term, you might see an effect.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. That's interesting. I don't know. I don't know about that.
I saw that between there was a conversation that it was an Instagram live between Gabrielle Lyon and Don Layman. And they were both talking about that, and I thought it was super interesting. So I haven't vetted it, but I mean, at least on the surface, it makes sense to me.
That's cool. Yeah, that would be cool. I think the reason that recommendations about eggs have changed, and so that we don't worry about them, is because on average, if you eat fewer or more eggs, it's not going to affect your health. Most average people, it's not going to affect them. I think on the margins it might. If you go completely plant-based, adding eggs is probably going to increase your cholesterol. But then nobody's completely plant-based. Like, so they're just like, okay, they're just being practical. Like they're like, no, it's not going to affect anybody's health. That's why the recommendations have changed. But I don't think eggs are probably a big boogeyman. If you're like really looking to optimize cholesterol, maybe. But like, here's another consideration. And again, this is not going to resonate with your viewers, but maybe I shouldn't say this. People are like telling me not to say this.
I want to hear.
Oh no,
it's not gonna be a Kevin Bass podcast unless you say some controversial shit.
Well, okay, so the first thing I want to point out though is I have to apply for residency soon, so I have to like get into residency and not like have things said that like so like, and then I also just don't. Yeah, I think it's a good thing to, but okay, so what I personally do, because I believe in the lipid hypothesis of cardiovascular disease. I believe that like the evidence is so overwhelming and so crystal clear that. So then personally, I like take a low dose of a statin. I don't have high cholesterol.
I knew that, by the way, because you've said that on social media. I knew that.
I say it, but I'm trying to be more careful lately because I don't want I don't want to like residencies to be like, no, we're not going to take him because he says like, so I'm trying to be a little bit more circumspect, although I still want to say the truth. So I'm going to say the truth too. And I'm going to like say what I really think. And the reason for this is that I think statins, especially like really low doses, are they're very safe. And that's probably even more true of like PCSK9 inhibitors. They're like extremely safe. I think the ones that are hydrophilic, right? The ones we've had this discussion, the ones that don't enter to the brain. So rosuvastatin, pravastatin in particular, super safe.
So some real quick, some statins are more lipophilic and some are more hydrophilic. And the lipophilic ones have a greater potential for entering the brain and screwing with the cholesterol producing machinery in the brain. Is that, did I characterize that well?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, the lipophilic ones like enter all the cells, the brain, the muscles, they enter all the cells very easily. Whereas the hydrophilic ones, they don't, because to enter the cells, you actually have to go through the plasma membrane. And if you're lipophilic, that means you're soluble in fat, so you can very easily pass through plasma membranes. But if you're hydrophilic, you have to have a receptor to get you in. Well, the receptors are really only present in the liver, so for the most part. So the hydrophilic ones really only go into the liver, whereas the lipophilic ones go everywhere. They're more dirty, so to speak. So you probably don't want a bunch of lipophilic statins going into the brain. It's probably not the best for the brain. That's not.
So if you had to pick a statin, make sure that it's a hydrophilic.
Yeah, pravastatin or rosuvastatin, I think people should be emphasizing. I think current practice is moving in that direction of people emphasizing those over, say, like a torvastatin or which has been traditional. But I think rosuvastatin's better, and it's just ridiculously cheap. So I take 2.5 milligrams of rosuvastatin a day, and I don't notice anything, but my LDL cholesterol gets really low. So I like 60 milligrams per deciliter, and it's thought, or sometimes it's said, I'm not exactly sure whether this is exactly true, but a lot of cardiologists will say like below 50 milligrams per deciliter, you're basically impervious to cardiovascular disease if it hasn't developed already. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I try to keep everything, like my risk factors, really good. And then if I can just reduce my LDL cholesterol even lower and I have no untoward effects, then I do that to just keep everything as optimal as possible. Because most people end up with some cardiovascular disease. Most people, majority of people, it's the number one killer. And having just one risk factor off, like, dramatically increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. If you have just one risk factor that's not perfect, your lifetime risk of cardiovascular disease goes to like 35%. If you have like 0, it's like 10%. And I want to just keep things as, because then at that point, all you have to worry about is cancer and dementia, or those are the main 2 other ones. So then I just try to keep LDL cholesterol low. So for me, I'm like, I don't really care much about eggs because I'm like, well, my LDL cholesterol is like already tanked from taking a statin. So it's something that people could could talk to their doctors about if that's what they wanted to do. Probably not. Don't say my name, and don't share this with any residency directors, please, because it's also not officially medical advice. It's legitimately, and I'm not a cardiologist. That's for sure. But
Right.
But the whole field of cardiology is moving more and more the direction of broader prescriptions, for better or worse. Maybe you might have some problems with that, but like, I think we're finding that the lower the LDL cholesterol over a longer period of time, it's pretty beneficial for heart disease, and people are still dying of a lot of heart disease. So the field is moving more and more in the direction, I believe, at least intellectually and in the journals, it's becoming more of a discussion to start statin therapy earlier. Not quite as radical as what I'm doing, but it's moving kind of in my direction. But we'll see.
Say we're able to eradicate heart disease, right? Like we put statins in the water. Everybody's on, in this hypothetical scenario, everybody's on plant-based diets. What is then going to move? We're all going to die, right? So what is then going to move into first position? Like it's going to be something else.
Yeah, cancer.
So I can't. I have trouble wrapping my head around this. Like, this idea that like cholesterol is the end all be all indicator of human health.
Yeah, well, it's not, obviously. Like, you've got cancer will obviously move into first place, and some LDL lowering medication. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to get myself in trouble. There was a recent meta-analysis. I'll say it. Did you see that? Did you see that Kanye interview where there was a clip I'll show you later. It was the worst thing I've ever seen, but also funny because he just can't help himself. Like, he just can't help what he says. Like, just like, I'm not going to say it, but then he says it anyway. So I'm doing what he did. There was a recent meta-analysis with ezetimibe that showed that like reducing cholesterol through using ezetimibe might increase the rate of intestinal cancer. It's looking at the randomized control trials, and so it's not observational evidence. It's like randomized control trial evidence showing an elevated risk because it may be because it perturbs the homeostasis in the gut, because it prevents cholesterol reabsorption from the gut. And so you excrete it, and so maybe it messes with anyway. So there are downsides, yeah. But I will say, if we can reduce LDL cholesterol without downsides, right, or with minimal downsides, or with small enough downsides that it doesn't offset the benefit, then just let's say we knocked out all of heart disease. Well, yeah, you'd get more people dying of cancer, but they would end up dying later, right? Because if you're gonna knock out heart disease and you're gonna die of cancer instead, well, then whatever that cancer is what's gonna happen later after the heart disease that you knock down. So then that's why, because then you're gonna buy for years. Now, are you gonna get more immortality? No. And my parents make the same argument to me that you're making right now. Like, they always say this to me, but if you want a couple more years, it's not, and then also if you don't want to have heart attacks, like heart attacks are terrible. Like, let's say you have a heart attack when you're 50, it knocks out some of your heart function. Like, you may not be able to bike as well. You just may run out of breath easier. Like, whenever you get to be like 80, you may not be able to go upstairs because you're like more and more weakness in the heart. So it's not just heart attacks. It's not just death. It's also like disability that you're reducing as well. And a lot of people are affected by these things. And so if you can just knock that out, then yeah, you're going to still maybe die of cancer, dementia, or a number of other potential diseases, but it's going to be later. So if you're interested in having a little bit more life, which I am, because I only have one, right? So I'm trying to get as much.
Say you use beef, for example, meat, animal products, which are generally speaking going to raise LDL compared to plant proteins, right? Because you get certain saturated fatty acids, right?
Like, maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
Is there, and you use animal protein to get yourself into a great body composition, you're lean, you're metabolically in pristine health. Is having an LDL that is still within a reasonable range, but not at the floor like it is, in your case, is that not a, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, is it, do the risks, don't the benefits outweigh the risks in that scenario? I didn't ask that question very well, but it's like, I feel like I feel like it seems to me unlikely that the risks would outweigh the benefits. I think it makes more sense to me that the benefits would outweigh the risks, and you'd and I don't know if we have this data that people on, super high quality diets that integrate animal products into their lives are at, all we have is population level evidence. Am I wrong? I'm happy to be wrong in this, by the way.
Well,
I'm just kind of like.
Yeah, well, so I like to go back to what you mentioned at the beginning of this part of the conversation, which is that we've changed our opinions about fish, for example, and then we've started to change our opinions about dairy and maybe about eggs as well. And so we're progressively. I think that there is a range of health effects of animal products on the heart. And that not all meat is the same. And if you talk to, say, a vegan, they think that all meat is the same or whatever. It's just nonsense. It's not. So I think there's a spectrum. And I think at one end of the spectrum is fish, right? Fish is like the most benign, maybe even beneficial. It's still being debated exactly. But it's at least the most benign, and it's definitely associated with not far less, but it's definitely associated with less cardiovascular disease. Even than some plant foods, by the way, right? So fish seems pretty good. And then I think next to fish is chicken. I think if you look at the epidemiological evidence, chicken actually isn't that far away from fish in terms of reduction in heart disease risk. So chicken's also high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, just like fish. It's more omega-6s, so maybe it's not as anti-inflammatory, but it's not, as far as its effects on lipids are concerned, it's probably not negative effect on lipids. And it's not associated with it's pretty good as far as the association with disease. And then I think you get into stuff like pork and maybe even then beef. It's really interesting. My understanding, but the more I look at this, the more I'm a little bit confused about this evidence. Is my understanding is that the relationship between saturated fat intake from fatty meat like beef is still not good. But I don't understand exactly why, because if you look at the composition of beef in terms of the fatty acid composition, a lot of those fatty acids aren't that bad. It's not like,
especially
like butter, it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
Beef is about 50% monounsaturated fat.
Right.
And then of the remaining 50%, I forget it's probably mostly saturated fat. There's a very small proportion of polyunsaturated fats in beef. But among the saturated fatty acids in beef, depending on what the cow's fed, you might get a higher or lower proportion of stearic acid, which we know is yes, it's a saturated fat, but it's also neutral from a cardiovascular standpoint.
Yeah, it's neutral, or it might even be good. There might even be good. Yeah, it might even be some good parts of it, Might even help you with health, like mitochondria or whatever, if we want to go down that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it might even be good. So maybe cocoa butter is good for you because cocoa butter also contains a lot of stearic acid. So then why is beef bad? But as far as I still understand, when I talk to the people I know, it's probably okay if there is a spectrum, and if some meats are worse than others, then probably beef is probably not as good as, say, chicken or fish. That tends to be the paradigm. I don't have a complete mastery or a very strong opinion about this, but that's, I think, is a paradigm that I tend to think is moving in the right direction. And then butter is at the end. Butter is probably a bad idea as far as cardiovascular disease risk is concerned. It really raises LDL cholesterol. The composition is not that great. Okay, so
that's an area where I've changed my my position, and I don't like to fearmonger, and I still will integrate butter as like a YOLO indulgence, but I think I'm in agreement that you get a little bit of retinol. As retinol we talked about in butter
and butyrate.
But it's
you get butyrate
and butyrate.
You get all your butyrate from butter. Just eat sticks of butter.
Yeah, but so in general, it's not the most it's not a nutrient dense food like any pure fat. It's just not a nutrient dense food. And it's really extracted from the dairy food matrix, you know, and it's like it's churned and it lacks milk fat globule membrane, and it seems to be a potent relative to other dairy fats and animal fats, I think in general, potent elevator of LDL. So that's to me where I think I've changed my publicly, like, you know, my stance, and to me it's more of like a YOLO indulgence. And of course, like all the paleo people, you know, hate when I bring that up, but
yeah. So then the question is like, okay, so then if you eat beef and you have not like super low LDL cholesterol, but it's, you know, but you're in perfect health otherwise, and maybe you have, you know, normal LDL cholesterol, is it like still okay? You know, I think if you optimize your LDL cholesterol, I don't think there's really good evidence. Like if you go with what your cardiologist says and you're not increasing your LDL cholesterol and it seems to be pretty low and healthy, I don't think there's any evidence that independent of that, you're really harming your health by eating beef. So I don't think you have to worry about, I don't think there's any evidence that you have to worry about beef independent of its effects on LDL cholesterol. So if your optimal health markers in every respect, and you're not have elevated LDL cholesterol, it's like in the normal range, it's like well within the normal range, I don't think that there's, you know, any good evidence. Now, I think that having even lower is probably better, but again, that's still not mainstream conventional medical advice yet, and it may not never be. But I think it's all else equal, it's probably better. But I don't see any harm of having like really good LDL cholesterol levels and then eating beef if you can maintain those LDL cholesterol levels eating beef. I don't think there's any issue with that. And there is differences in how people respond. Some people have higher elevations than others. So maybe that accounts for some of the health effects that we see in the epidemiological literature. And if you don't have those bigger, and if you have perfect LDL cholesterol, it's not a big deal. That's perfectly possible. And I think that's probably the consensus view. So,
yeah. I'm probably genetically prone to hypercholesterolemia because of my ApoE4 allele, you know?
Yeah.
And so I like to balance my intake. I'm not even consciously balancing it. Like I think I think meat is very beneficial, and it's helped me it helps me stay relatively lean and strong in the gym and everything. But I like to also like integrate like vegetables and fiber, and I think fiber is important as we've talked about. And I think like psyllium husk is a great potential supplement to use. You know, if you're psyllium husk actually could bring LDL down by like 20% or something like that, like a fairly significant 10 grams a day, I think is the dose, which is a bit much. It's a lot of psyllium husk. But yeah, I think fiber is super important. Coffee is actually a natural PCS. I mean, my PCSK9 inhibitor of choice is coffee.
Really?
Has been shown to be effective.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And,
really?
And caffeine. Yeah.
Oh, huh.
High doses. But yeah, they've shown that caffeine is a natural PCSK9.
So this is a health drink? I didn't know that. That's
it's
great.
A health drink, yeah. Yeah. I think the dose was like 400 milligrams.
It also has carnitine and taurine. What else? That's perfect. Right? It has all the things that meat has that are great. And caffeine.
There was like a week-long period where you were going off on taurine.
Yeah.
It was like your favorite nutrient for like a month.
Yeah. I mean, well, so taurine acts kind of like I don't know if it's it's not the same mechanism, but it acts kind of like psyllium husk in bringing down LDL cholesterol. It like brings it down a lot, substantially. It also, I think, helps with blood pressure. It helps like glucose. It's like helps with everything. It's like amazing. And taurine's not in plants. Like there's not a lot of taurine in plants. There's like one plant where there's taurine, like a bean, like some Mexican bean, or at least according to somebody that like had an angry response to me in saying that actually beans, like not all plants don't have taurine, whatever. But there's like apparently like some bean that has taurine. But it's only in animal foods, and interestingly, it has like mental effects as well. So it has like this. It's like pro-GABAergic. It apparently binds to like the glycine receptor. So some people take glycine to help them go to bed. There's not really good clinical trial evidence on this, but there's some mechanistic belief. But it binds to the same receptor as glycine, and so it may facilitate sleep. It can crash blood pressure, like almost as good as like blood pressure medication, like high doses.
Taurine.
Taurine. So
Wow.
It might be one of those many compounds that's in meat that's not present in plants that might actually be responsible for not acting like a crazy person. So maybe whenever you find the vegans who are like just bananas on Twitter and everywhere, they need to take taurine, because that will help them be not crazy anymore. So I think maybe it's something in meat that might actually promote mental health. So. Oh, there was a study. Interestingly, there was a study where they gave it to people who had like psychotic episodes, and they had a faster rate of recovery from psychotic episodes having the taurine supplementation. It was incredible. So, psychotic vegans out there, if you're listening, think about it. Do you want to cut that part out? We should cut that part out. Go ahead.
That's why I think it's a mistake. See what I did there? To cut out. It's a mistake to cut out all foods that have the potential to raise LDL cholesterol, because you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're cutting out as a result, which could have potential unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
All the other nutrients that we know and suspect to play a beneficial role in health, like taurine, carnitine, creatine. It's just it's nutritionism, which I think is a big problem. It hasn't worked for us well in the past, right? And I don't think it's the right approach.
Okay, I agree that LDL cholesterol is not the be all end all, and that I 100%. And I think that like beef may have a lot of really good things, not just taurine, right? Like carnitine, creatine. Creatine might help cognitive function, may help memory. So, and may not even just be these compounds, maybe vitamin D. There might be like half a dozen or a dozen different compounds that independently might have small effects, but then overall, especially over a long period of time, might have a substantial impact on health, maybe brain health, for example. And so, you're maybe increasing your LDL cholesterol, but then you're getting all these other positive benefits for the brain. Maybe it's not. We don't know that yet, because we don't have studies where they're combining all these into like one, supplement or whatever. It's just sort of like they do a clinical trial with just taurine by itself or just creatine by itself. But so we don't know. But it's possible that, especially when you add everything together, you might even start getting substantial effects. And yet we don't talk about that very much, and that's not a good thing. Yeah, we make everything about LDL cholesterol. It's 100%. But we should have some idea what the individual components, the contributing effects of the individual components are, because maybe it's possible to choose some foods that have some of the positives without some of the negatives, or maybe it's possible to take out some of those nutrients and supplement them instead of having those foods. These are things that I'm looking into lately. But I agree with you. So.
Yeah.
You looked at me weird.
No, I love it. And by the way, I don't want it to be lost on my audience that you low key referred to yourself as the Kanye West of health, which I think actually fits.
I shouldn't have done that. No, we should. No.
He is a genius. He's a lunatic. But musically, at least,
I think he's great. I don't agree with his views. I think he's been through some bad experiences that have led him to say some things that are not. Man, I know a lot of Jewish people. It's like he's lost it there. But he had a lot of really bad experiences. We're not going to go too much into this, but he had some bad experiences that have led him to say stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm Jewish, and you didn't know. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you don't get it from my last name.
Yeah.
Because my last name is like it was probably changed at some point, you know. Jewish last names are usually traceable. My dad thinks that it's possible that my last name at some point was like Levine or something, like a few generations back. But yeah, when I just see a guy who's like crying out for help, you know, probably has some, well, we know he has mental health issues. And I wasn't like, oh my God, Kanye West, like lock him up, you know? Yeah. We have to take these kinds of things seriously when they're echoed on a big stage, because they can create downstream effects.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I worry about that a lot, especially with that kind of stuff. You know, I don't even know if he's mentally ill. I wouldn't even say it like that. I just think he's going through stuff. You know, he's trying to. Yeah. You know, and he needs to mature, but he needs to grow up. Like he's got stuff to work on for sure. And I think that's I think we can definitely agree on that. But, yeah, yes, I guess I'm the Kanye West of nutrition. Fine, we'll accept it.
It sounds like he could use some taurine.
Yeah. We need to find a way to DM him. We need to let him know. We need to send this to him, this podcast. We're the solution to his problems. He needs some vitamin D3. He needs some taurine. He needs some L-carnitine, and he needs some creatine. And yeah. But yeah, no, I agree with you. So yeah, I agree with you. And so that's the one. So that's why you can take a statin. That's why I kind of take a statin, and I like to enjoy the other things. Also, choline, man. There's a bunch of health benefits from that. But yeah, again, like but then you have basically these ethical issues. You have like the land issues. You have all this stuff. So what vegans will do, or what the establishment will do, is be like, okay, overall, we have to decrease animal intake and stuff. So then they overlook the downside of what they're doing. This happened with COVID too, right? This happened with like school lockdowns, like getting people, like kids weren't in school for like a whole month. And that's because they were like, oh, we need to reduce spreads. Reducing spreads is the most important thing, et cetera, et cetera. But they didn't realize like the impact of closing schools on people's education was going to be horrific. And it was horrific, and it has been horrific for those kids. So what people do is they'll take this one little marker, one little nutrient, one little thing they're focusing on, they'll make that everything. And in that respect, I agree. Like this reductionism in nutrition has been terrible. We can even segue into seed oils from that, right? Because you love seed oils. People have made seed oils, reduction of LDL cholesterol. They've made that like their God, like their idol. So they've made that like, you know, and so therefore seed oils are great because seed oils reduce LDL cholesterol compared to, butter. But it may be the case that like having excess intakes, like I'm not going to endorse this view necessarily because I don't know what the truth is here, but it may be the case that having excess linoleic acid intakes might be detrimental. May not be, may be fine, but may be detrimental. And so just because you reduce your LDL cholesterol doesn't mean you're making health better. You're making maybe heart disease risk, at least along that dimension of that one parameter, better. But you're not making health better because there's so many other negative things that you're creating. I don't think that's been shown that there's negative things from reducing seed oil. I think there's some trials that suggest a benefit and some other trials that are not that good that maybe show risk. I think seed oils are probably not that bad, and I'm not anti-seed oil, but I'm open to the possibility that, especially for the brain, because we don't have good evidence about the brain, right? We don't have any evidence about the brain. We have these cell culture studies which show interesting things that are a little bit concerning. We have some speculation, but we don't have long-term studies looking at, okay, what if you supplement massive amounts of seed oil? What is the effect on the brain? We have zero evidence about that. That concerns me, because especially if you make these really big population level recommendations, you don't have good evidence to support them. You don't have any evidence at all.
Exactly.
You don't have really good safety evidence. You just have like some evidence along one particular axis or one particular disease. And then you tell everybody to do it. Well, then what are the other downstream consequences of doing that? And that could have been, there could be some for seed oils, for example. But yeah.
I think that's the right attitude to have. That you're not against them necessarily, but you're, and I might take a somewhat harder line approach, but that you're at least open-minded to the possibility that these novel foods are having some kind of downstream effect somewhere in the body, possibly our brains, where we have zero evidence, right? Zero long-term human evidence.
Well, okay, so
to say with certainty that they're safe.
Yeah, your Alzheimer's, your dementia mentor, the guy at Cornell, what's his name again?
Richard Isaacson.
So he has,
he's not against them. Like, this is not like an idea that I've gotten from him. Just to be clear.
Yeah. But it's important to realize that with every action, there's a potential downside, right? With everything that we do. So something in his book that he recommends for people who are at high risk of dementia is reducing homocysteine through vitamin B supplementation. So I think it's like a B6, B12, and I think, is it folate? Is that the other one? Anyway, those are the 3 vitamins, and those vitamins, they reduce homocysteine levels, and they also have been shown in randomized controlled trials to slow the rate of brain shrinkage among older people in like a really remarkable and substantial way. It's like holy crap, it's like a big deal. But if you look at some studies like I think it's the 2000s, early 2000s, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, there's a pair of studies where they gave these vitamins to people with, I think, hyperhomocystinemia, because there was a whole theory in those at that time about how homocysteine levels might contribute to cardiovascular disease. So they're checking to see if by giving those vitamins to reduce homocysteine, you could reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. They actually found in those studies there's some small signal, a substantial signal, and in one of those studies, even in the abstract, it notes like there's some signal that maybe the reducing homocysteine too much in this population might actually increase the risk of heart events, unstable angina. So there's maybe a positive effect, but there's also, a negative. And I think that I think we should just always be open to the potential negatives. Now, I supplement with these B vitamins because I don't think my heart disease risk is that high. I don't want my brain to shrink, so I like the idea of supplementing with these vitamins and keeping homocysteine relatively low. But we should be open to the possibility that there could be other considerations that may make us change our mind about what course of action we think is best, because there's always downsides to things, and we should always be open to the downsides of things. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There was a really good study that I shared a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you saw it. It was on migraines, and basically they took this population that has chronic migraines and they randomized them to either like their control diet, an omega-3 supplemented diet where they were giving them 1.5 grams of omega-3s per day, or an omega-3 supplemented diet with a reduction in linoleic acid. So they got rid of all of the grain and seed oils, but they replaced it with other oils so as not to control for calories and fats, right? So it wasn't just like they were eating less or anything like that. And what they found was that the magnitude of the effect was the highest by almost twofold in the group that simultaneously lowered their linoleic acid. So it wasn't just the supplementation with these anti-inflammatory omega-3s, but the concurrent reduction in linoleic acid. And migraine, I mean, that's like, you can see that acutely, right? If like this is having an effect on like neuroinflammation, which we think is involved in migraine. So I don't know, man. I mean, I'm not connecting that to Alzheimer's disease or dementia or anything like that. But
well,
what? Well, did I just connect?
It's just funny. Yeah. It's always, yeah. I mean, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. Yeah. I mean, everything you said makes sense. The mechanisms make sense. I'm open to that. But yeah. But I also just to take the other end of things, I don't like when people fearmonger based on stuff we don't know enough about. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. That's
fair.
You're pointing out a potential something that's going on. And yes, seed oils, omega-6 fatty acids do interfere with the anti-inflammatory effect of omega-3s. Like, we know that. So then it makes total sense, like your mechanisms. And then you talk about brain inflammation. That makes total sense. Those mechanisms. I would not want to have brain inflammation. If I could figure out a way to reduce my brain inflammation, I would do it. Stop trying to talk me out of getting rid of all omega-6s in my diet. But like,
it's just
yeah. But I will say this: we don't like. Yeah, I mean, I'm becoming a follower. Now we're going to have to, but I don't think we should blame seed oils for everything though. I don't think that's like been shown either. You know what I mean? But
I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree with that. They're not the smoking gun. I think they are part of the exposome. Have you heard that term? Just the overall like exposure to industrial toxicants everywhere, overly sedentary lifestyles, hyperphagia induced by a chronic exposure to a hyperpalatable food environment. And then you've got these novel oils, which, are maybe playing, it's just all the things. It's not just one thing, but, I will say that growing up, the reason why I might have a bias against them is that those were the oils that I had in my house. And my mom was on a very low saturated fat, low cholesterol diet because she was concerned about heart disease. And those are the fats that we have. I swear to God. And so I'm just, anything that was around chronically in my house that led to my mom's illness, I'm just I've got a magnifying glass too,
So did she ever have headaches or migraines? Just out of curiosity.
She did. I mean, she passed away 3 years ago, but she did. Yeah, occasionally. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I want. Yeah. I'm gonna have to I want to search in the literature after this conversation. I'm interested in a bunch of stuff now.
Do it.
Yeah.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
Is it so simple as just the food just tastes good? And it turns out that it's not that, and that there's actually a biology where you activate a switch to gain weight.